Hi there, I'm Joe with Pride Conveyance, a Roeslein company. This short video will walk you through how to install a disconnect to a drive or blower motor. We'll walk you through each step of the installation process, including the tools and materials you will need for the process. This tutorial demonstrates installation of a disconnect for a blower motor by attaching it to the blower frame. The process for installing disconnects to drive motors is similar, only the disconnect box will be attached to the side of the conveyor frame. When you unbox the disconnect, you should notice that the entire Allen Bradley 194E load switch is contained in one piece. Along with this switch component, you will need an arrangement of tools and materials for the installation process. Each of the tools you will need for this installation is shown here.
Feel free to pause the video here if you need to review this list.
All of the materials you need are shown here. With the previously listed tools and these materials, you're ready to install your disconnect on your motor and attach it to either your blower frame or the side of your mechanical conveyor. After unboxing your disconnect, place the disconnect box in front of you in your workspace. Remove the disconnect box lid and set it aside, leaving the disconnect box base set in front of you. Inside the disconnect box base, you should see a disconnect switch attached to a disconnect switch plate, which is attached to the disconnect box base. Our first step is to remove the standard mounting screws that are situated halfway up the plate on either side. Remove these screws and bore out their holes with a 1/4 inch jobber drill bit so that we can mount the disconnect box base to the mounting plate. First, remove the screws. These screws will not be needed at any point later in this process. Then, bore out the holes to a 1/4 inch diameter. Next, center the box base atop the mounting plate and stencil out the recently drilled holes. You'll want to set the box base aside so that, using the same 1/4 inch jobber drill bit, you can drill out the stenciled holes on the mounting plate. Finally, attach the box base to the mounting plate using a button head bolt, a 1/4 inch washer, and a 1/4 inch nylock nut for each of the two holes. Once you've attached the box base to mounting plate, follow the same stenciling and boring steps to attach the mounting plate to the side of your blower frame. The ideal position will vary depending on blower design and size, but some useful tips to keep in mind are to center the mounting plate, level it, and to stay mindful of how you plan to insert the metallic conduit fitting that will feed 1/2 inch conduit into your disconnect box. Mount the disconnect box base to the blower frame using hex head bolts, 1/4 inch washers, and again 1/4 inch nylock nuts. Any nuts securing mounting plates to the blower frame should be nylock, as standard nuts will wiggle loose over time in response to vibration from the blower motor.
Using a 30-bit or pilot bit, you'll need to drill a hole into the side of the disconnect box base. The pilot hole should be drilled into the left side of the box, roughly 1 inch up from bottom and centered between the front of the switch plate and the edge of the disconnect box. This spacing allows for the flexible metallic conduit fitting to be inserted into the box free of obstruction. Switch your drill bit over to the 15/16 inch rotor bit and bore out the pilot hole you drilled in the side of the disconnect box base. You will use this hole to feed 4 12-gauge wires into the side of the box. Locate the 90-degree flexible metallic conduit fitting and insert it into the hole, tightening the threads on either side to secure the fitting. Next, we'll want to remove the cover for the electrical box on the motor. The motor shown here belongs to a can line that makes use of metric hardware, so we'll be using a 10mm socket driver to remove the cover. The components inside the electrical box are relatively fragile compared with the rest of our materials and equipment. Exercise caution when working closely around the electrical box, and use hand tools instead of power tools whenever possible. The electrical box should include pre-drilled threaded holes through which additional wiring can be fed into or out of the box. Here, the cover's holes are 32mm wide, so we'll insert a 32mm to 3/4 inch reducer bushing. Into that bushing, we'll insert the 3/4 inch to 1/2 inch reducer bushing. Finally, we'll insert a second 90-degree flexible metallic conduit fitting. Tighten the fitting securely into the reducer bushing using channel lock pliers. Use the 24-inch long piece of flexible metallic conduit to connect the two 90-degree conduit fittings. The fitting includes separable pieces that can be removed from the fitting, placed over the end of the conduit, then rethreaded back together. Repeat this process for the other end of the conduit fitting. Before rethreading the newly capped conduit into the fittings, thread your bundle of 4 12-gauge wires into the electrical box, through the first fitting, through the conduit, through the second fitting, and into the disconnect box base that is mounted to the blower frame. The individual wires within the bundle should be roughly 48 inches in length and should be identified using the T1, T2, and T3 wire identification labels. These labels help prevent installers from connecting wires incorrectly. The grounding wire is green rather than black and does not require an identification label. Attach a nylon insulated ring terminal to the end of each of the wires that protrude from the motor's electrical box, crimping the terminal securely onto the end of each wire. Draw slack out of the wires by pulling them through from inside the disconnect box base so that roughly 10 inches of wire remains protruding from the electrical box. Beginning with wire T3, wrap the wire around the terminal plate counterclockwise until the wire reaches the 6 o'clock position. Then twist the wire into a small clockwise loop before fitting the ring terminal over the electrical terminal at furthest right. Slide the ring terminal over the plate's electrical terminal, then secure the terminal's nut using a 7mm socket driver. Again, these metric socket driver sizes are specific to the motor used by this customer. Repeat this process to attach wire T2 to the middle electrical terminal and wire T1 to the terminal at furthest left. The 3 wires should create small, neat loops below the terminal plate with wire identification labels clearly legible. Before moving on, attach the green grounding wire to the grounding terminal inside the motor's electrical box. From inside the disconnect box base, pull any slack from the wires and prepare to trim them. Each wire should run approximately 10 inches beyond the conduit's entry into the disconnect box. Trim each wire one at a time, reattaching an ID label to the most recently cut wire before cutting the next. Again, the green grounding wire does not require a label. Once all 4 wires are trimmed, strip each wire to 1/2 inch exposure. Reinsert the disconnect switch into the disconnect box base with the yellow rotation stopper at the 7 o'clock position. Angle the switch's top inward to catch its clasp in the correct position at top, then tilt the bottom of the switch inward into position. When securely and correctly aligned, the switch will snap into place as the clasp on its bottom edge slides over its corresponding notch on the switch plate inside the disconnect box base. Starting with the green grounding wire at furthest right, loop each wire into a clockwise drip loop below the disconnect switch and insert it into its matching slot in the bottom of the disconnect switch. Secure each wire's screw. Leaving any of the wire's metal exposed creates fatal electrocution risk for future handlers. Cramming a wire too far into its slot will bunch and peel its housing, creating the same risk. Once each wire has been securely inserted into the disconnect switch, disconnect installation is complete. Replace the disconnect box lid, seating it into place and tightening the screw at each corner. Remember also to replace the lid on the blower's electrical box. Feel free to toggle the switch between on and off positions to ensure it turns properly. This concludes this tutorial of installation of disconnect switches to motors on blower frames or mechanical conveyors.